Hello and welcome to another episode of Meta Report. I'm your host Deathy, and today we're going to talk about what's the most meta for heroes, the overall meta changes, as well as items that you should be abusing. As always, there will be timestamps in the video below to help you navigate if there are specific things that interest you. As well, any build that I recommend will be linked in the description below, so make sure to check it out. Let's get into it. Let's start with the overall meta changes. First, Earn is a little bit easier for the team that's ahead now. So they changed the location to just be a little bit more open and a little bit more favorable. So it's still easier if you're the team behind, but it's not as impossible to capture the Earn if you're ahead as it was before. The overall game pace is faster. Jungling has been discouraged. The jungle creeps are worth a little bit less, and overall, people get more money from lanes than they did before, thanks to the new soul sharing changes. If you'd like to know more about that, feel free to check my other video that I made specifically on the economy of the game. I'll link it in the description below. Team fights are key past 20 minutes. This was kind of already the case, but now the kill bounty has been increased, making it so team fights are very, very important and determine basically the entire game. So if you have a lead, you lose a team fight, the other team is fully back into the game with a combination of comeback souls as well as just overall kill bounty being higher later. So make sure that if it's past 20 minutes, you're grouping with your team and you're taking team fights and you're not making too many solo plays on the map unless you're guaranteed to do something good with that play. Make sure you're not dying past 20 minutes, prioritize your own life, play with your team if possible. And Soul Rebirth is gone. It's dead. It's been removed from the game. As far as I know, it's the first item that's been removed from the game. Every other item has just been changed a bunch, but Soul Rebirth was just completely deleted, which is a great change in my opinion. Let's get into the heroes. Do you want to roll around as Goo Ball and be this big?
I like having a body.
If that's the case, I've got the perfect build for you. This is Goober70 Ball Hybrid build. Once again, I'll make sure to put the code in the description. This build is very, very strong, and Viscous in general is stronger than he was before, even though he was already strong. So now the ball actually scales, the size of the ball scales with ability range, which makes items like Magic Carpet, Improved Reach, and anything else that gives range just much better on Viscous, such as Healing Nova, which was already very strong. And so Viscous ult build is back, although it's not as oppressive as it once was when you had the perma-stun Viscous with Ethereal Shift and things like that. Your ball is much harder to dodge just due to its sheer size. And one small thing to note as well is that even though they made the ball much bigger, your collision size to go through doors is not any bigger, which means that you can still go through fairly small doors even though you're huge, right? So if you can see, it looks a little bit weird, but you're still able to go through openings even though you're much bigger. So Viscous in the current meta, I would say, is very, very, very strong. This hero is really good. So if you're looking to win your ranked games, this is a very good one to do it on. The hero is a little bit higher skill ceiling. So a couple of quick tips for Viscous to add is, first of all, you can use his punch to like move around quite a bit. It gives you good movement. As you can see, you can do it on the ground and then use shift to move forward. And another tip I'd have is using it on walls is much more effective. If you just punch a wall and then do a dash, you'll go very, very far, which is great movement, and then you can just slide to maintain your momentum. I'm not a Viscous expert, so go check out a Goober's stream if you're interested as well. It's Goober70 on Twitch as well. Yamato. Well, her voice actress has been updated, and she has a bunch of cool sound effects now for her sword. Unfortunately, she's also the most annoying character in the game right now because she is basically unkillable in her ultimate. So, due to the recent change, she is now technically killable in her ultimate, but she might as well be unkillable. I don't know how many Yamatos you guys have seen die in their ultimates. I sure haven't seen a whole lot. And usually if they die in their ultimate, it's because they're very far behind in the game and they just were playing poorly. The Yamato build I would recommend would be Ronald's build. This guy's the ultimate Yamato spammer. He plays some other things, but he mostly plays Yamato. He's an any player. If you're looking for an alternative, I would recommend that you look at Dimov's build if you're interested in an alternative. So there's the Dimov Yamato updated for Listic. Once again, I'll put that in the description as well. It's got a lot of similarities, but a few differences. So I'd recommend you try, whichever one you prefer. Ronald build's classic. He keeps it updated. The thing with the Dimov build is it might not stay updated, whereas Ronald's build is always updated because he's playing Yamato pretty much every single day. So I highly recommend you guys check this out. If you want free wins right now, Yamato is the character to do so. She is a little bit tricky to learn, but once you've learned her, she's extremely powerful, outputs a ton of damage, and is just a menace with her ultimate, as well as her ultimate getting 2 seconds extra every time you kill someone, meaning that you can wipe teams if you're just that strong. Let's talk a little bit about Lash. So Lash has gone through a decent amount of changes in the previous patches. In this patch, he didn't really get any changes, but I think he's stronger than he was previously because you just get a little bit more souls, and that was from going to lanes, and that was one of the things Lash struggled with. Lash is very bad at farming the jungle. Well, he's not like the worst jungler, but he's not great either, which means that any change that makes the game more active and less oriented towards the jungle is going to benefit Lash in one way or another. I believe that it can be pretty hard to carry games with Lash outright, but I believe that he's also an extremely strong character right now. I don't think he's S tier or anything, but since I haven't talked about him for a little while, I thought it would be worth mentioning it and mentioning what builds I'm using. There's two main builds that I'm using, which is the Slam Lash. This build is oriented around maxing your ground strike and doing a ton of damage, and this build is much better to when the enemy team has a lot of squishy heroes. Think Haze, Wraith, heroes that don't have a lot of health scaling that you can one-shot in the mid game with your ground strike. If you want a more consistent build, then my Brawling Lash is a classic one that I've been updating for quite some time, and I think that it's very, very strong right now still. It is a little bit of a different playstyle that maxes Flog and uses a lot more gun damage, and so feel free to try that one if you like it as well. I think it's still very, very strong, and both playstyles are totally valid. I would usually go this one if I need to do a little bit more consistent damage and if they have tankier characters that I can't one-shot, but if you want to one-shot and have some fun, the Slam build is also extremely fun, so try that one as well. Let's talk about Paradox. So now Paradox swap is extremely fast. If you guys haven't seen a Paradox swap, let me just demonstrate it on this dummy target here. But if I go for the swap, it has been slowed down a little bit. It was even faster before, but it's still quite fast, which is overall a nerf to the hero. The hero keeps getting nerfed every patch. Now Time Wall can't have charges anymore. And yet, the hero is still S tier. This hero just can't seem to be bad no matter how many times they nerf her. They have buffed the kinetic carbine damage a little bit, so now it's 100% max damage amp, so some left click builds can be back on the menu with her a bit, but I would recommend that you play around swapping people and going Fleetfoot melee charge in the mid to early game. So this is Eido's build, Eidorian heavy melee cancel Paradox plus bomb, so later on you'll transition into bomb, but basically the idea is that you can heavy melee cancel with your kinetic carbine, and you can also do it with Fleetfoot, which means that you can get insane movement by abusing 2 heavy melee cancels in the early game and moving insanely quickly between lanes. This is a great build for ganking, and I would highly recommend that you guys learn heavy melee canceling if you haven't yet, as it's a move in tech that is pretty broken, especially on Paradox, and it probably will get removed at some point, although I'm not sure, but I think in the current state that it's in, it's a little bit too powerful. So I hope you guys enjoyed this build, and go ruin people's day by just melee canceling around the map and moving at Mach 3 speed pretty much all the time. Let's talk Warden. So I haven't been playing a ton of Warden recently just because my team has needed me to play other heroes, but I think that Warden is very, very strong right now, and there's a lot of ways to play him. You can play Spirit build, you can play Ults build, there's a ton of different ways, but personally, I like Gun build. And I've liked this Warden playstyle for a very long time, pretty much ever since I picked up Warden, I think in July. So I recommend you guys try this build, Deathy's Warden build. Once again, code in the description. The idea of this build is you'll go Fleetfoot, Veilwalker, and pretty much a bunch of gun items, and you become kind of an assassin where you press your 2 with the movement speed, and then you'll move very quickly. If I buy all the items, you'll see the speed. Let me show you. So once you have all the items, if you go through a Veil with your 2 active, this is how fast you move. And this is without popping any of your actives. So if you pop your actives, let's say Fleetfoot and Divine Barrier, and then your 2, you move extremely quickly going through Veils. And the idea is you basically sneak up on people using your insane movement speed, and then you slowing hex, grenade, and then cage them. It's very important that you use slowing hex, grenade, and cage in that order. You can also grenade and then slowing hex. That part doesn't really matter, but make sure you use cage after you've used grenade and slowing hex, because grenade removes 1 stamina, and slowing hex is going to make their stamina slower. So you don't want to cage too early because you want to slow them down first. Other than that, this build just has a ton of gun damage built in. It's very, very strong, and you'll surprise people. Warden has some of the highest gun damage in the game, and people don't expect it. But I'm telling you guys that this build is very, very good, and I've had multiple people in my Discord that have great success with it. So I highly recommend you guys check it out. Finally, we're going to talk about Ivy. So this hero has been quite strong for some time, and nobody's really talking about it. And I was looking at the public builds, and a lot of the builds that I'm seeing are just not really that good, or they're fine, but I don't really love them. So the Cat Girls builds are a classic, but one thing I would say is right now the strongest Ivy playstyle is playing around your ult and your Kutsu bombs like this hydration build does. So this is Spirit Carry Ivy by hydration. It's very, very strong. Your ultimate is insane. It applies a 4.5 second silence in an AoE. The area is huge. It does decent damage. It gives you bullet shield. You can carry allies with it. You can initiate fights. Your Kutsu bomb also does a ton of damage. So if you're just flying in the air and dropping Kutsu bombs, you know, below you, it's just a very, very strong way to play Ivy at the moment. And I would really recommend that you guys try it out. A lot of the time, especially in ranked, one problem teams have is they have no initiation or no safe initiation. And Ivy is exactly that, because she can just fly in, she can drop her bomb with a huge silence, throw the Kutsu bomb, and kind of freely initiate for your team. And on top of that, the biggest counter to Ivy, so if you guys are running into this, is knockdown, because it knocks her out of her ultimate, but a lot of people just don't buy that item. And so this makes Ivy even stronger, because most people don't know how to counter her. As a final point, I want to remind you guys that if your favorite hero isn't in this meta report, it doesn't mean that your favorite hero is bad. A lot of the time in these meta reports, I have to make decisions on which heroes I include and which heroes I don't include. And a lot of the time, there's heroes that I talked about the previous week. And those heroes I don't mention again, usually the next week, because I feel like it's a little bit redundant because there haven't been any major changes to them. For example, Mirage is still very strong, but I'm not talking about him in this meta report because I talked about him in the previous one. You guys will see, I'm going to put a tier list towards the end of the video. You guys will see who I think is strong, who I think is a little bit weaker. But yeah, that's just to say that not every good build is in this video, only the ones that I think haven't gotten enough exposure. Let's move on to items that I think got better, or at least were changed significantly enough to talk about them. The first item on this list is Healing Nova. So Healing Nova now gives ability range, which is a great stat. It's basically having, you know, Mystic Reach, although it's obviously weaker than Mystic Reach. It's only 8%. But regardless, this item is so strong, especially in the current meta where fighting is so important and like being able to take objectives, etc. matters a lot. An item like Healing Nova is just very, very strong. And I would highly recommend that you guys try picking this up on heroes that you wouldn't think necessarily want this item. I know that on a lot of heroes it might not feel that great, but the stats on it are just really good. 12% weapon damage, 100 bonus health, 6 spirit power. Pretty much every hero wants these stats, and having healing is nice. Plus, on top of that, it builds from Healing Right, which is an item that you can also buy on pretty much every single hero in lane as your form of sustain. So if you're used to buying extra regen, perhaps consider buying Healing Right instead, and then building it into a Healing Nova a little bit later, and just having more sustain for your entire team, especially at lower MMRs where people aren't buying healing items. Fortitude has gotten buffed once again, and at this point, I think it's starting to get a little bit ridiculous. I think it might be one of those items that's just like, we keep buffing it, and the community keeps underrating it, and then eventually they're going to buff it one more time, and it's going to be too far, and everyone's going to buy this item. At this point, it gives 400 bonus health, which is an insane amount. To put it in perspective, Colossus, which is considered an insane item as well, gives 600 bonus health. So you have Fortitude, which is a little bit more than half the cost, granted, but not much more. And it gives 2/3 of the bonus health, as well as a base 17% health. Granted, Colossus gives 20%, but it's not much more. You're getting 17% base health, and on top of that, you're getting 400 health. Plus, you're getting the regen, 4% max health regen after 10 seconds of not taking damage. By the way, lane troopers don't count as damage. It doesn't say anywhere, but they don't. And you're getting additional weapon damage when you're above 75% health, as well as movement speed. At this point, this item gives a ton and synergizes very well when you have armors as well, because it gives you a ton of EHP. So I highly recommend you guys think about this item and buy it a little bit more. Reactive Barrier has been buffed, so it does say it in the description, but it's kind of sneaky a little bit. It restores 1 stamina once it activates. So let's say you had 0 stamina, it'll give you 1 stamina if you get stunned or if something activates it. This item was already pretty decent in my opinion. It gives you ammo, health regen, and the 600 shield is really strong early game, especially if you're playing against heroes like Wraith, for example. Now the fact that it gives 1 stamina makes it even better at what it was doing, which is helping you survive. So I would recommend that you guys think, do they have any stuns on the enemy team that are problematic? Do they have a Bebop? Do they have a Wraith? Do they have a Lash? Do they have things like that that make Reactive Barrier worth a buy? And if so, could heavily consider this item. Finally, I wanted to mention Decay. So Decay now has ability duration. It lasts longer. And on top of that, it does 70% healing reduction. The only thing that was nerfed about Decay was the bleed damage, which is now 1% health, as opposed to, I believe it was a little bit over 3% before. So it does significantly less damage. However, it gives you another stat, which is ability duration, which is quite nice, on top of the ton of spirit it already gives you for the cost. And 70% healing reduction is the highest healing reduction in the game, making this the best item to buy against heroes that have a ton of lifesteal. If you guys are having problems with Infernuses or Abrams or other heroes that are healing back up to full very easily thanks to their lifesteal, make sure you buy this item. It's better than before in terms of anti-heal. It's not as good as it was in terms of damage, but the anti-heal component is very strong. Finally, let's talk about my tier list a little bit. So in must pick / must ban, I have 4 heroes: Paradox, Mirage, Yamato, Viscous. Pretty much every single competitive game that you'll see will have these. Let me preface the tier list by saying that I made this tier list with my knowledge about what's being picked right now at the top level. Depending on your skill level and depending on your MMR, these will vary for sure. So Vindicta and Grey Talon, for example, the worse your MMR is, the better these heroes are, right? Because they're harder to punish. You need to buy knockdown. You need to buy specific items. So I just wanted to say that as a disclaimer, because I know that people like to use these tier lists and compare them between different streamers, etc. So Paradox, Mirage, Yamato, Viscous, in my opinion, are probably the 4 strongest characters of the patch at the moment. As far as scrims and tournament matches that I've seen, Yamato and Paradox, I would say, are pretty much significantly above the rest. Just so you know, this tier list is not necessarily ordered. They're in tiers, but they're not like ordered. But just for comparison's sake, I would say Paradox and Yamato are almost always banned every single game. And if they're not banned, they're usually first picked. Other than that, Mirage and Viscous, kind of the same story. If they're not banned, they're usually picked pretty early on. Then very good, we have Ivy, Kelvin, Wraith, Abrams, Pocket, Mo and Krill, Lady Guy, 7, and Lash. I actually hesitated putting Pocket in very good because he's fallen off a decent amount, but I think he's still very, very good as a character, but you could argue that he is just good. Other than that, there's not much to say about these characters. I don't really want to go in depth about every character state. Most of the characters are in a really good place right now, and so the distinction between very good and good is not that clear. And some of the characters that are in good can be very good based on the game, right? Like, for example, Grey Talon or Vindicta, if there's no counters on the enemy team, can sometimes just rule a game. Shiv can also pop off. Warden can also be insane. Dynamo, if he gets like really big black holes, can be insane. And all of these heroes have really good potential. So in good, we have Infernus, Dynamo, Bebop, Warden, Shiv, McGinnis, Vindicta, Grey Talon. A lot of these heroes were nerfed, not all of them, but like, for example, Infernus, Vindicta, and Grey Talon were higher before. Now they've been nerfed a little bit, not that much, but potentially enough to knock them down from very good. I think Infernus is still very good, to be honest, but I think, you know, for some reason, he's fallen off a little bit harder than I expected him to, and he hasn't felt as good as he has in the past. But I don't think he's close to being bad by any means. And then in not very good, I think Haze is still there. She still feels, she's playable for sure, but she still doesn't feel great. They gave her some buffs that make her, well, I guess they're not necessarily buffs, they're more like changes. Now you can use items in your ultimate. That's a big buff. And her early game is also a little bit stronger because her damage scaling is like better early on, but it kind of falls off a little bit later. So her early game presence is a little bit stronger, and she's also a little bit better because of the fact that she can move around the map pretty easily compared to other heroes with her smoke bomb, and moving around the map is very good right now with, you know, the way that lanes give money. But other than that, she still suffers from the same core issues. Metal Skin just hard counters her, return fire, same thing. So there's just a lot of items that make her so she's not as strong as any of the other quote-unquote carries. Like, you know, usually you'd much rather have a Wraith, a 7, an Infernus, or other heroes like that, or even Yamato, etc. All right, so that's going to be it for the video, guys. Once again, if you enjoy this type of content, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, you know, all that good stuff, and catch me live on Twitch. I'm pretty much live almost every day, so make sure you check out my Twitch. It'll be in the description. All right, have a good one.